Welcome to Curious Christianity. Today we are discussing Young Earth Creationism once again. And today I have Ben Kissling. I think, is that how you pronounce your name? And so he is going to help explain some of his views on Young Earth Creationism. And he has a Young Earth view that actually I've never heard before. So we'll be very interested to discuss some of his views and further this conversation moving forward. So, Ben, welcome to the channel.
Hi, thanks for having me on. I've been consuming some of your stuff recently, so I really like the way you approach things.
Because I think it's really important, like if we're going to continue to have deep discussions, to be able to keep it friendly. There's no reason we have to hate each other over disagreeing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the best way to approach that, I've been doing online discussions for a long time, and I realize that the best way to approach it is to understand that neither of us are going to change our minds about much, if anything, and that kind of removes the pressure. So,
Well, and here's the one other thing, though. And one of the reasons I wanted to have these discussions is because I feel like, at a minimum, and I'm perfectly fine. And I know, like lots of times when I debate people, they don't change their minds. But what it does is it brings clarity, more clarity to the issue for others. And I want to make sure that, hey, if you want to be a young earth creationist, that you understand the views on that side. And the same goes for Calvinism, Arminianism, and things like that. For me, what's really annoying is those that have a certain view, but they actually don't know that much about the view. You know, they kind of have the titles and the names, but they're not really familiar with a lot of what the view espouses or holds. So I hope that people have a better understanding of young earth creationism and some of the arguments against it. Sound fair?
sure.
Yeah. Okay, so for this one, yeah, I might ask you a few more questions instead. Apologeti was grilling me the other day, and so it's a little bit, we'll go the other way today. How's that?
Uh, that's fine. It's your show, so.
Well, so I guess first off, so I am just a little curious. I wanted to know, so did you start off being a young earth creationist, grow up in a Christian home, or is this something you've developed into?
Yeah, I was taught that growing up.
Mhm. Okay, cool.
And yeah, and I got into intelligent design theory
Mhm.
in high school because of a book my dad gave me. My dad is a doctor, a medical doctor,
Oh, cool.
and so I think a lot of times in young Earth creationism, most people who believe it grow up just reading the Bible and
Mhm.
saying that's enough for me. I just take it at face value and that's it. My dad was very different than that. Okay. He was a very intellectually oriented guy and he wanted to know the reasons. And I know that I can't think of a single time growing up when I asked a tough question, my dad said, just believe it because the Bible says so. I don't
Mhm.
remember him ever saying that. He said that about curfew,
Right, right.
right? You have to be back at 8 o'clock because I said so. But he never said that about the Bible. He never said that about young earth creationism. He always gave me a reason,
Mhm.
even if it might have been a bad one. He always taught me that reasons are important. So
Awesome.
that's how I grew up and investigated it for myself and gained confidence in what I think and went to a biochemistry degree in college. Through that, never once felt as challenged as growing up in the evangelical community tries to convince you college is going to challenge you. But I think that's because I had really good teachers.
Perfect, perfect. So let me just set the tone a little bit. So to me, it seems that I believe one of my core things is that I believe that the Bible leaves the question of the age of the earth or universe open. I just don't think that it speaks definitively on this subject. And so, to me, or whatever, if the Bible leaves this question open, then it mostly goes to the scientific arguments. I, as well, have consumed a bunch of your podcast, Macrophage, and so I believe that one of your core arguments here is about the historicity. The Bible is focused on history, and that's its primary focus. And so therefore, yeah, if the Bible asserts that the earth or universe is a particular age, then that should be the primary source that we derive this truth from. And I don't really want to say that I would disagree with that claim. Of course, now I would just say that I disagree with, is that claim accurate, right? So, but yeah, essentially you would say that what's more important here is the historicity of the Bible rather than the Bible making a scientific claim. Does that sound right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
I'm very skeptical of the idea that the Bible contains scientific information in the
Mm-hmm.
modern sense. And you probably haven't gone this deep into my material, but on my YouTube channel, I have talked about specific examples of this, including other young Earth creationists who do that sometimes. So, um,
Well,
but
yeah. So you would agree that the Bible contains no scientific genre of reading.
uh, yes.
Yeah, that it has genres such as poetry, literature, apocalypse, prophetic, and history, right? But it doesn't really have a. And this is the science book. We don't open it up at, second Darwin and appeal to some sort of, yeah, biblical science text.
Yeah, and those types of claims come from both sides. So, for
Sure.
example, when you get any kind of old earther saying, or atheist saying that the Bible says that the heavens are a solid dome, the rakia above the
Mm-hmm.
earth, I don't think that's what the Bible is saying at all. Or arguments about how the sun stood still in the sky. I think you
Mm-hmm.
asked me about the Joshua question. Was
Right,
that
right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
So,
so this is really interesting. So this really leads into kind of my first major question that I'm curious about then, right? So if it's about history and not science, what are we supposed to make of the days of creation?
um,
Like, oh, okay, I know
everybody,
maybe that question was too vague. I'm sorry.
well, no, I mean, well, I mean, the days are a very normal concept that everybody understands. I wouldn't call that a non-scientific concept, or I wouldn't call that a scientific concept. Everybody knows what a day is.
Sure, sure,
And
sure. But as
history
a
books
historical reading, right? What is it supposed to be conveying about history?
that 7 days passed in a historical event of creation. So for example, if I mean, if I said something in a history book talked about, I'm trying to think of a good example here, um, the reign of terror in France
Hmm.
lasted a certain number of days. Like I would say, okay, if this history book says that, for 40 days they cut people's heads off in Paris or whatever, I don't know how long it was, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that I would assume that means 40 solar days, the same thing we mean by days today.
Right. Okay.
I don't think that's something that can't be included in a historical account. In a certain sense, there is I've discussed this before with people, but in a certain sense, virtually all scientific observations also count as historical observations. So if I were to question, for example, the data that Francis Crick and James Watson used to come to their conclusion that DNA was a double helix, what I would consult would be old scientific journals that they referenced. Um, and I would say, okay, those observations were made 67, well, let's see, that was 1953, so 70 some years ago. Some scientists made these observations and recorded them.
Sure,
Now,
sure. Now,
when I
now,
okay,
I guess so. What I want to hedge a little bit because I'm not trying to say that the Bible is making a particular claim towards science. What I'm curious about then is if it's focused on history Is it not conveying additional meanings, or would you say that it is conveying additional symbolic or other types of meanings outside of history?
Sometimes.
So, like, what would you say the message is that God's trying to convey, or is he merely trying to record history through Genesis 1? Is that its primary focus?
I think I think he is trying to convey other things there. He's trying to say that he's the creator
Okay,
of all things,
right.
and that makes him, the one true God in opposition to a pantheon of pagan gods, for
Hmm.
example. It's pretty clear from at least Exodus that some of that the 10, I wouldn't say it's pretty clear. It's a common, well
Yeah,
accepted theory that the 10 plagues in Exodus
yeah.
are God's intentional action to refute the Egyptian pantheon.
Hmm.
So I think it is the case that there are portions of scripture where God is intentionally saying things to refute.
And so Genesis 1 might be part of that polemic against all of the Egyptian gods, right?
Right, but the best argument is the truth.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes, yes, no doubt, no doubt. Um, Now, so the reason I asked that is because, like, it seems to me, I'll put it this way. So it does not seem to me evident that Genesis 1 is explaining the creation of all material things. Well, or that days 1 through 6 are focused on that. It seems to me like days 1 through 6 are focused on the creation for mankind.
Um, I disagree.
Yes, yes, yes. But okay, now tell me why you disagree. Or perhaps I can add one onto that, but if you want to respond to just that, I guess. Why think that this is espousing the creation of all things?
Because it mentions a lot of other things besides just the creation of mankind.
Right, right, right. But it's mentioning it's setting up, I think that it's setting up two primary things: God supremacy and then man supremacy. Those are, I think, the larger focus of Genesis 1.
I mean, I agree with that.
Okay.
But like I said before, is like, why, if God has access to the way it actually happened, why wouldn't he just tell us? And it seems like that the truth would be the best argument there. And God would be the one capable of communicating that,
I
because
believe he is capable.
and he was the one who was there the whole time, right? And so why wouldn't he just, if he's the one true creator God, why wouldn't he just, hey, this is how it happened, right? This is how I did it. Believe that instead of all these false stories and false gods.
Mhm. Is it
Um,
possible that God was not telling us about the story of all of creation?
so if you're hinting about your argument there about the first couple verses, that there was something there before the day one.
Well, I'll put it this way, right? So to me, the one thing that it seems like it's omitting is the angels.
Okay,
Yeah, God doesn't talk about the creation of the angels here.
that's true. I don't think this is from the text, but I think there's a good reason for that. And I think that's because angels are spiritual beings.
Hmm.
And I believe that the spirit, I'm a substance dualist, so I would say
Yep,
that,
I am too.
but I go a little bit further and I would say that the spiritual realm, as opposed to the physical realm, is not
Hmm.
governed by time. And that means that things which happen in the spiritual realm do not have a point in time. And so when you in the Genesis account, right, when it's describing the order of creation in time, the creation of the angels does not occur in time. So I can get some biblical support for that when Jesus says, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven, right? And so um, things happen immediately in spiritual sense.
So yeah, we'll have to dive into this more, but so in short, I want to make sure because okay, so number one, of course, I'm going to disagree with a whole bunch of stuff you said there, but to start, just to make sure it's more clear, yeah. So my point would be, and I get it that you disagree, but for everyone else's sake, there are some things that are created because you do agree that angels are created, right? That are not mentioned in Genesis 1.
Yes.
So then it, for me, and I know, well, we'll have to get into the time thing. So I'm just saying for me, because I don't believe in this other notion about time, for me, that therefore follows that there are some things that are created that are not mentioned in Genesis 1. So then it seems logical to conclude that something occurs prior to Genesis 1, verse 3, in which God creates, talks about separating light from darkness on day one. Because to me, there's a day before day one. Then
I think by definition there can't be a day before day one.
only if you assume now, because to me, day one is the beginning of the creation or forming of things for mankind, but it's not the beginning of all things.
Okay, so this is one thing I probably need to do some more research on, is Walton's view of functional creation, which I think you hold. Um, I think that when he says it's the first day, that means it's the first day. I mean, I don't know what else and I don't think it follows that because he doesn't mention literally everything that he creates in that account, that means therefore it's not the first day. I don't follow that argument.
All right. Well, let's focus more on closer to that. But I definitely we're going to come back to this time issue. All right, because that's getting into some of your things, and I definitely wanted to save some of that for a little bit later. Um, so the text says, right, Genesis 1:1, do you take verses 1 and 2, which Genesis 1 through 2 is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was void and formless, and darkness was over the surface of the water, and the Spirit hovered over the waters or whatever, right? Do you take that to be part of day one or separate? Or do you just take it as which view do you hold? There's a bunch of views.
I tend to think tentatively that that means that these are the things which are logically prior to the creation of time. So if you don't have a temporal sequence, and this is an issue I get into with open theists, right, where they say if
It
there,
definitely seems to be like time is going to be an issue in our conversation.
yeah, well, it's a huge feature of my particular views is that God is timeless, right, which, William Lane Craig and others disagree with, right? So,
Yes, and I'll just clarify, I hold Craig's view. All right.
so
That
atheist,
God, yeah, God enters into time at the first moment of creation. And I will include though the creation of the angels. So any sort of creation, spiritual, non-spiritual, physical, non-physical, or whatever, I would hold as a moment of creation. And therefore, I don't think that it makes sense to say that God creates something atemporal, like outside of time.
so you're just saying that the angels would also be in time. Yeah,
That's
okay.
correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you were asking me about Genesis 1 and 2. Yeah, so I think that that just means that there are certain things that have to happen ontologically or logically prior to time existing, and that's what was created um, logically prior to the first moment of time. I don't think it makes sense to have something temporally prior to the first moment in time. That's one of the reasons I reject Craig's view. But it's interesting, though, that there's been a successful creation science theory based on the idea that the planets were created out of water, by Russell Humphreys, who assumed that the planets were created out of water.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the initial conditions of the water molecules, that resulted in a planetary magnetic field. So each hydrogen atom and there's two, H2O, there's two hydrogen atoms in a water molecule. Oxygen does not have an electromagnetic field, but hydrogen does. And what he thinks is that the hydrogen molecule, the hydrogen atoms in the water molecules were created by God to be perfectly in alignment, that doesn't happen today because of entropy and some other things. Okay, they're all jumbled up. And so water does not have a magnetic field, but if you create it at a precise moment where they're all in alignment, the magnetic fields of the hydrogen atoms would all align perfectly. And in this way, he calculates the initial strength of a planetary magnetic field. And then from there, the planetary magnetic fields decay according to a predictable curve, except for the flood. There has to be a large energy loss during the flood, which he has a whole mechanism for that, and everything based on polarity reversals, which there's physical evidence for. But the bottom line is that he predicted prior to their measurement the magnetic field strengths of Uranus and Neptune. And Uranus is especially interesting because the secularist predictions were that were based on a theory that requires a molten core, and Uranus does not have a molten core. And so if the magnetic field is as old as the solar system, as the planet Uranus, without a molten core, they don't have a theory of how it could last that long, because magnetic fields are created by electrical currents
Mm-hmm.
and vice versa. And so in the water that the planet started out as, what he's
Mm-hmm.
suggesting is the initial alignment of the molecules created a magnetic field. But then because of entropy, the water molecules immediately became disordered and jumbled up. So they were no longer generating the magnetic field. But because water is a conductor, the magnetic field that was generated at the beginning induced a current, an electrical current inside the planet. And
Okay.
ever since, the magnetic field has been sustained by the electrical current. But because electrical currents have to wear down because of resistance always, and that's part of the second law of thermodynamics, is that, I'm not sure if resistance is part of that. It's a separate law. It's like V equals IR. It's a simple law. But because of resistance, the voltage of the electrical current is always going to be decreasing. And we actually measure the decrease in the planet's electromagnetic
But
field
how are you connecting this with Genesis 1 and 2?
because
I
it said,
mean, I agree that certainly there is certainly this idea of the planet being formed with water. I mean, Hugh Ross actually talks about some ideas like this, and of course, he believes that yeah, the Earth was had different water things. I'm not as much on the science arenas and stuff, but I know that yeah, plenty of old Earthers will talk about the idea of the planet being water, and even now it's I don't remember a large percentage water. So,
yeah,
but how is it connected to you for Genesis 1?
I'm just saying that this is a way in which young Earth creationists have used what we consider to be historical data, to be an accurate reporting of the events that happened,
Mm-hmm.
and use that data to make a scientific theory that has made successful confirmed predictions.
Okay. So when I think that, yeah, I think that it shows that water and other things were present prior to day one, mentioned in Genesis chapter 1.
Logically prior.
Yeah, and I think that it's sequentially prior because I think it's showing the initial conditions for days 1 through 6. So the initial conditions begin with emptiness, like disorder, chaos, and water.
It can be an initial condition without being temporally prior. So that would be a slight disagreement. I think we're really saying the same thing there.
Well, no, we're not because I don't buy your theory of time, right?
So are you saying there's billions of years before day one?
I'm not so like as concerning like okay, billions of years here or there. I'm just saying that it's possible that whatever it is cuz let's just say there are whatever 8 days, right? And but I'm just saying like okay, well, so you could have one day prior to day 1 in your Genesis chapter 1 because it's just saying that there's an initial condition right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was void and formless. And so it's saying, like, okay, so here's an earth and here's water. And then you begin day one,
Okay.
right? So
I'm
it's
not.
like, so I'm just saying, like, you already have stuff, you already have matter, physical things, time, space, all of those things that start before day one.
Not time. Well,
Yeah,
I am unclear on your particular view. Like, I have not read Walton's book,
no worries, no
Lost
worries.
World, and I'm not,
Well, and it
I've not
wasn't
read
Walton's
Leonard.
book. It wasn't Walton's book that converted me anyway, right? Um, it was more so Dr. Soden, but doesn't matter because some of the same ideas. But the idea would simply be this. This is the only thing that's relevant is at the moment, right? Is that I'm just saying if I read Genesis 1 literally, right? There is matter and energy and all of those things before I start on day one. The Bible simply says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It's like, and if you read that literally, it's like, okay, so God created the heavens and the earth in the beginning. And then, right, what was the state of the earth at this point? It was void and chaotic, or, and some people might be confused, but you can go look up the words, um, it's void and chaotic, and there's darkness on the surface of the water. So water is present, the earth is present, those things are all present. And then God said, let there be light, and he separates the light from the darkness.
Yeah, and my view fits with that. And I haven't read Miller and Soden's book, but if I don't, you might not be aware of this, but William Lane Craig certainly has.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about it in his Defenders 3 class, which I have a whole bunch of YouTube videos reviewing that. He had a whole section called the Excursus on Creation of Life and Biological Diversity. Say that
Mm-hmm.
15 fast.
I know, right?
Practice. And he references Miller and Soden's book in that class, but in Quest of the Historical Atom, nothing, which is written after that class.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually went and checked this recently. When I realized you had read this book, and I searched for Soden, and that's why I like electronic copies of books.
It's easier.
No matches at all in Craig's book. And so he does mention the theological polemic view, but he uses other sources. And so I'm
Sure.
actually curious as to why he never referenced Miller and Soden in that book.
I
My
mean,
speculation would be that he found it to be less than adequate.
well, I
um,
certainly don't think that you're about to espouse Craig's view because he puts Adam and Eve at 500,000 years ago. And
no,
that's
but
just Adam and Eve.
both he and I would agree that the theological polemic view is faulty for much the same reasons.
I'm not entirely sure what you mean. I thought you were espousing earlier that there's at least a partial theological polemic view.
I think that God had that in mind when he actually did the creation and communicated it to Moses, but I don't think Moses had that intent. I think he was writing down what God communicated to him, especially in Genesis 1. So when Moses recorded the 10 plagues of Exodus, he was not saying to himself, I must disprove the Egyptian pantheon.
But you're saying that
He
God
was writing
was?
down what happened. Yeah. And the reason I'm saying that, I think some of the reasons why God did that are to reject the Egyptian pantheon. And that may have been the case in Genesis 1.
Yeah, I mean, I think
But
it seems particularly strange to me to think that God is up there thinking, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to create the universe in such a way that will specifically refute the Egyptians during the time of the Exodus.
well, no, those are different issues. The 10 plagues in Exodus, I think, were designed that way,
Okay.
not creation.
Okay, not creation.
So Craig's critique of the theological polemic view is that
Mm-hmm.
he thinks it's very difficult, if not impossible, to draw parallels between the text of Genesis and these ancient creation myths. And he calls it parallelomania.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't think that's relevant actually. I actually don't think I don't really care because I'm not espousing like, oh, the reason that they wrote Genesis this way is because of these other creation myths. No, I'm perfectly happy in saying that it's like, okay, yeah, this is how things happened. And maybe it was all of the other creation myths, right? That we're drawing from a single source of truth or any of those sorts of things. Either way you slice it and stuff, I believe that, oh, this is what the Bible says because this is the way the Bible is espousing things. I think that's correct. Now, Craig's particular view of Walton's view initially was his complaint that John
Oh,
Walton is. Hmm?
this is not Walton's view I was talking about. I was talking about Miller and Soden's view.
Okay, what distinction did you want to pull off of Miller and Soden's view, or that you're
Their
complaining
view
about?
is the theological polemic view. That the
Mm-hmm.
Genesis narrative was written specifically to refute other ancient Near Eastern creation myths.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the concepts there is the idea of water as a symbol of chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an ANE theme, an ancient Near Eastern idea, is that water is is symbolic of chaos. And the creation myths that of that time were saying that this is how the gods interacted with each other and with human beings to bring order out of chaos.
And do you not believe the Bible teaches that water is a symbol of chaos?
Not in Genesis 1. I think it just means he created water first.
Okay, but in when we go to the book of Revelation, I believe that it talks about God talking about, and there will be no more seas, right? And God is going to slay the great beast Leviathan and all these sorts of notions. Isn't it talking more so about the defeating of chaos?
Maybe, but Revelation is a different genre than Genesis.
But
It's
it's
an
calling back to the
apocalyptic.
same imagery, right?
Sometimes. What verses are you talking about?
I'd have to pull them up. I didn't expect that we would go exactly there, but
Neither did I.
it wasn't exactly on my initial radar for.
Well, that's okay. We can go back to your initial stuff if you want, but um,
So yeah,
I
yeah.
might have
So
an opinion on that, but I just need to see the
I
verses.
know, I know, I know. Well, sorry, I didn't. Yeah, again, I wasn't expecting that
That's
to go
okay.
all the way over there. So
Um, so I my general view of all this is that God gave human beings free will, and he gave us the power
okay,
to oppose his plan for the world.
you just triggered all the Calvinists.
Yeah. So that means that when we make sinful choices, I define sin as a choice made against the will of God. Okay,
Okay.
which first question I'll always ask Calvinists is, how do you define sin? Because I define it as a choice made against the will of God. Okay, and
Mhm.
they can't define it that way. So they would have to say it's against one of God's wills, right? But so when human beings make choices that are sinful against God's will, it causes an alteration in the course of history from what God had intended. And this would also differentiate me even from a free will position like Craig's, like a Molinist view, because
Mhm.
Molinism and some other free will views say that God, even though we have free will, God has planned out every position of every molecule in
Mhm.
history.
Yeah.
Right? I don't believe that.
Are you an
Okay.
open theist
No.
for clarity? Okay.
Uh, I probably would fall under a general category of views called simple foreknowledge.
Okay.
But very simply, I think God knows the future, but does not cause it
Got it.
in any
Yep.
way, even in a Molinist sense. So, so when God is going back to Revelations, if God is portrayed as defeating chaos,
Mhm.
I would tend to interpret that to mean that he is wiping away all of the cumulative effect of sinful choices of human beings and demons, and in restoring creation to what he initially planned it to be and wanted it to be, logically prior to the influx of human sinful choices. So that would be chaos in
Now,
my be
now,
a world dominated by multiple competing authorities that have power to direct certain things that happen.
now
And
that's a good segue into
okay.
your. That's a good segue into one of your other major points, which apparently, yeah, your time issue is going to be a thing. So my understanding, and please correct me because this is the part I'm interested in what it is you're saying here, but you believe that the earth and its creation are basically pre-started with sinful conditions. Is that right? Because God is outside of time. How does God create the universe perfect and complete, or some other way?
Yeah, okay. So this is what would separate me from pretty much every young earth creationist that I know of. And that is that most young earth creationists would say that God created the world perfect, but at the fall, he changed it
Mm-hmm.
so that there were consequences of the fall um, uh, suffused throughout creation in the language of Romans 8, where creation was subjected by God to futility.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And
and
you would
I
disagree with that.
Right. I think that God, being outside of time, can and does engage in backwards causation as his primary mode of sovereignty. And that means that he can he can do things in the past that are motivated by events that occur in the future. Not his past and his future, because he has no past or no future, but in the timeline. And that means that he can start creation right off the bat with the consequences of the fall. And this is why I don't use the argument against old earthers that there was no animal death before the fall.
Okay.
Um,
So then you would be on the side of saying that there was animal death. Or you would
no.
be open, but not really necessarily like what is it you are saying about animal death?
So I don't think that animal death happened prior to the fall, or at
Mm-hmm.
least most likely did not,
Okay,
because I think the fall occurred rapidly after creation.
sure.
And
So
the
didn't
evidence
didn't
for
give
that
animals time.
Right. And the evidence for that is that Eve didn't get pregnant until after the fall. Because I don't know about you. If I was running around with my wife naked in the garden, right, she would get pregnant pretty quickly.
I usually say this is to me this is the argument for the eating of the fruit. It's like, hey, look, the hottest woman in the world just said, "Here's some fruit, eat this." And it's like, well, no
Or the
arguments.
meme that says, I think it's a Babylon Bee headline that says, study finds 100% of men would eat anything given to them by a naked woman.
Yeah. Something like that, exactly, right?
So I don't think that there was large, like what the Bible would call animals
Mhm.
dying prior to the fall. What I do think is that I don't think there was any what I call global intervention at the fall that changed the laws of nature. Like some would say that God introduced the second law of thermodynamics at the
Mhm.
time of the fall. Most people who understand what the second law of thermodynamics is would disagree with that, including young
Mhm.
earth creationists. Jonathan Sarfati disagrees with that, for example, because he knows what the second law is. Um, chemistry, biochemistry, and would have to be completely altered if you introduce a second law after not having had it.
Yes. Like,
Um,
well, I mean, the entire universe. Like it
so
would it would alter everything.
this is where I something you said in a previous conversation I totally agree with, and that is that if you introduce any kind of global intervention at the fall that change things in general way from being perfect to not being perfect would entail a complete rejiggering of the entirety of creation such that it would involve a second creation event at the
Hmm.
fall. And I don't think that that happened, and the text does not indicate that at all. And so that, in my view, is an extra biblical claim. Doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means I don't think that's entailed by a young earth position. And I think I'm making another extra biblical claim that God is outside of time and can
Mhm.
engage in backwards causation to explain that. And so and then what the young earthers will come back, the other young earthers will come back and say, well, God says creation was good. And at the end of day 6, he says it's very good.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's not perfect. And my argument there would sound very similar to yours.
Right, right. So we're in agreement there. See, it's you
Yeah.
and me, Ben.
You and me, baby, being
Yeah.
nothing but mammals.
No, 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 not there. So okay, so would you say then, so since the world begins with this backward causation, that God does not curse the ground during Genesis 3:17, talking to Adam at their fall, and that he's does so prior, or
I think that God curses the ground because of sin, but
yes.
temporally it happens prior. And this is a way of understanding the difference between the Garden of Eden and outside the Garden of Eden. Is that outside, God knew because of his foreknowledge that Adam and Eve would stay in the garden and then they would sin. And because of that, anything outside the garden can be under the effects of the fall already at
Mhm.
the start of creation.
So that's very interesting right there. So you would agree that, yeah, essentially the rest of the world outside the garden would basically be the same as it is today for
It
all
could be,
intensive. Yeah. Okay. Could
could
be.
be. I don't think it has to be on my view.
Okay.
I think that kind of makes sense.
But you would say what does account for animals being born with or created with venom, teeth, all of the defense mechanisms, they're frogs that like, change colors or all these things, that those are initial conditions of creation.
Yes, and I think because again, there's a strong scientific reasons to believe this is because a lot of that stuff that you're talking about is clearly designed on a intelligent design view even.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to explain like how did God actually put in those designs in all of those animals and establish this complete new ecology with predator and prey relationships. All of that happened at the fall. Again, you're talking about a complete rejiggering of all of biology.
Yeah, it would be massive, right? It's
Yeah,
cataclysmic.
yeah. And so
Be-
I think it makes total sense to say that that all happened in the initial creation because of God's foreknowledge of sin. And he's allowed to do that. Why wouldn't he be allowed to do that? Even if you're a Molinist and you don't think that God is outside of time, he still knows the future.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, he
So
could do it. Yeah.
this is an argument made by William Dembski in a book called The End of Christianity. And I
Okay.
was actually kind of already leaning this way, but when I read that book, I think it came out about 10 years ago, I just openly adopted it. I'm like, and he's an old earther, right? He's some kind of old earth creationist, intelligent design theorist. So,
Mhm.
and he argued that, God can input the consequences of the fall prior to sin actually entering the world, temporally prior, but not logically prior. Right. And so that would be
Mhm.
the problem that a classical theist would have with this view. Uh,
Yes.
yeah. So we both understand that, right? Is that God, among other things, his impassibility would mean that he cannot alter his plan according to anything outside himself, right? So um, God, even in a non-temporal way, God logically waiting for human beings to do something and then responding to what they do as though he was waiting for their action, that's excluded on a lot of classical theist views.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean in short, so I am a little curious then. In many ways your view hinges on God being outside of time. Like that's a central core component for your view of young earth creationism. Is that right?
I wouldn't say it's a central component of young Earth
No,
creationism.
but I know your
I would
view.
I would say it's a central component of my own holistic worldview.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this then. If you didn't believe that, if you believe that God, that in an a theory of time and everything happened not only logically sequentially but actually temporally sequentially, right, in a particular, how would that change some of how you would manage this question of young earth creationism?
I mean, obviously, yeah.
Okay, all right, gotcha. um yeah, the time theory. So, do you have a fiction novel written too? No, I'm sorry, just bad time jokes. So,
I'm working on
oh,
it.
hey, there you go, there you go.
Isn't everyone working on the next great American novel?
Yeah. So, what do you perceive as kind of the best arguments for young Earth creationism?
Um, well, the best arguments, I have podcasts where I gave 4 reasons for young Earth
Hmm.
creationism. Um, and I'm a little bit blanking on it now, but the main point that I would make to people is that often I think many people have an unconscious assumption that science is automatically true,
Hmm.
and that it must be correct, and even if it's not correct, it's the best we have.
Hmm.
Um, um, and even people like, sophisticated philosophers like Craig, and people like J.P. Moreland is a little on the fence on this, and some other ones would say that, we have to accept data from science. Um, and, it's like, yes, we do. You don't deny what we see, right? It's the interpretations of that data that where young Earth creationism differs from science. And
Right.
so what I start with is an account of what's happened in philosophy of science in the last 60 years, ever since Thomas Kuhn's book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which I would recommend to people. I'd also recommend you first read his first book called The Copernican Revolution. And what Kuhn shows is that historically, scientific advances are not incremental. Usually, big ones like Newton's theory of gravity was not an incremental advance. He literally went to his house alone and stayed there for a year and came up with the calculus and Newtonian mechanics. Okay, and this was this bolt of lightning out of nowhere. Copernicus's theory was similar. There were some earlier examples of heliocentric views, but Copernicus was largely drawing from the Ptolemaic uh, astronomy and the Ptolemaic model, which is a geocentric model. He just moved the sun to the center and kept a lot of the same things from the Ptolemaic model. But that is a radical shift in thinking. And what it began to show to many philosophers of science is that um, science is largely an issue of multiple competing hypotheses
Hmm.
and for the same evidence. And it turns out that oftentimes those hypotheses are underdetermined by the evidence, it's called. And that means the evidence does not decide between them. And that means that something else is making the decision between them.
Hmm.
And Kuhn suggested that that could include sociological factors like political interest,
Sure.
financial interest, even anything from outside of science proper, philosophical biases. So, for example, Craig, he wants to reject or alter, modify 20th century physics. If you listen to my podcast on Craig's book, you heard me talk to him in person about this, where he says, I think all of 20th century physics is based on the foundations of a false philosophical idea called verificationism.
Hmm.
And so Craig wants to go back in time about 100 years or so and start over with a new physics, rejecting verificationism as a philosophical claim. So there's a philosophical debate that affects your view of science.
Mm-hmm.
And I compare this to what Jason Lisle does with his anisotropic synchrony convention. He's a young Earth astrophysicist.
Yes. And
And he,
and that's in reference to the speed of light, right?
yeah, so the thing that Craig wants is he wants to return to a Lorentzian interpretation of special relativity, which predates Einstein. And he thinks that solves a bunch of philosophical problems. And so he wants to take a specific view of a scientific idea because of a philosophical reason. Lisle wants to do something that's very similar. He is reinterpreting special relativity
Mm-hmm.
because it fits the young Earth view better. And so he's taking it from what I would call a historical view of the Bible and a biblical view, and saying, I want to do science a little differently because of this information from outside of
Mm-hmm.
science. Okay? And
So
so
so on that, actually, I'm curious to get your response. I know I've had a few different friends who are all like, "Oh, you've got to bring this up." They all want to know the answer, and it's exactly about the speed of light question. Now, you are somebody who is much more in science, so you're the perfect person to talk to.
not for this.
Well,
I'm not a physicist, so.
well, you got time. You got time. You can change, right? Um, but the general question is this: the speed of light is currently thought to be about 186,000 miles an hour, something like that, right?
It's been stipulated to be that now.
Yes, yes. And
It's
I
now
get it.
a
There is a little bit of debate.
constant. Well, I don't think you'd get a debate among physicists that the speed of light is a assumption. The one-way speed of light is an assumption. And
Mhm.
Lisle goes directly back to Einstein and references this. And I bought a 99-cent copy of Einstein's book on Kindle just so I could look at this, right? And he
Mhm.
says, this is the one-way speed of light is a stipulation that I can make of my own free will. He uses the words free will.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the way
So
I would respond to that in general is just that I think Lisle goes a bit too far with it, honestly, and I think there's another young Earth creationist astrophysicist who explains it better than Lisle does, named John Hartnett. He's in Australia, and I can send you a link to his video if you want.
So I'm curious what your view is, because, well, and for those that aren't familiar, it's the idea that, okay, the sun, the moon, the stars, whatever, we see the light from these things, which are millions of light years away, the distance they are. Typically, we understand light to travel at 186,000 miles an hour. So therefore, the idea would be that it would take millions of years for the light to reach our eyes, right?
Billion.
Well, it would take billions, yeah, for many of them. Yeah, that's right. So how is that not scientific evidence that the universe is older? How would you understand that? That would be the question.
Well, the first response is that even old Earth cosmologists don't use that to date the universe.
Mm-hmm.
What they do instead is they calculate the expansion rate of the universe from the redshift.
Yeah, that would be one of the major
And
things and stuff.
yeah, and then they extrapolate the expansion rate of the universe back to the singularity and then say how long did that take based
Mm-hmm.
on the rate that we see it expanding today. They don't use the light travel issue to date the age of the universe, and there's a reason for that,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's because the one-way speed of light is arbitrary in relativity. Okay, you assume that it's the same as the two-way speed of light, but that's a convention. And
Right, right. Now, there's no evidence of a one-way speed of light. When the one-way speed of light being like the idea that maybe it travels a certain speed going one direction, then it travels infinitely faster going a different, coming back to us, right?
there can't be any evidence for any one-way
Yeah,
speed of light because it cannot be measured.
yeah.
And so the art basically the argument that young Earth creationism can't be correct because we see light from stars that are 13 billion light years away treats the one-way speed of light as though we have any kind of clear physical reason to believe that it's the same as the two-way speed. And that's just not correct. It's not a correct understanding of physics. And so I don't think this argument works against young Earth creationism. Now, what Lyle does is he takes it farther than that, and he tries to turn it into an argument for a model, right? Where he is now suggesting, this is how I read him, he's suggesting that there is some, well, I'm not sure if he would say this, but he is very clear that this is an arbitrary choice of coordinate system. And so the way to think of this in sort of a lay level terms is if I'm applying to a two-dimensional, let's say a two-dimensional map, if I'm applying a Cartesian coordinate system with x-axis and a y-axis to a two-dimensional map, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no objective way to place the point of origin, the 0 point where x and y-axis cross. You can put it anywhere you want on that two-dimensional map, as long, but you can't use the coordinate system unless you place the point of origin. Okay, so you have to make an arbitrary choice to place the point of origin somewhere on that map. And then once you place the point of origin, now you have a coordinate system and you can you can give numbers that reference specific spots on the map and communicate those spots to other people, and they can find it if they have the same point of reference. Okay, so what Lyle is saying with his expertise in special relativity is the one-way speed of light is the point of origin, or one of them. It's an arbitrary choice that you can put anywhere you want as long as you stay consistent, right? It's just a coordinate system. There's not a physical reality to it. And this is counterintuitive to people, right? Mm-hmm. Because when we in real life, we experience things having one-way speeds. In fact, that's the only way we experience things.
Yeah, because it's the only way we can perceive them, right?
Yeah.
We can only perceive what we see coming back.
Yeah, but relativity is weird.
Yes, well, and there's no doubt about that. So I'm curious concerning science. If we didn't have the Bible, would we conclude that the Earth is young?
I doubt it.
Okay, gotcha.
I think creation scientists have, because of this very common view in our society that science is the highest form of truth, which is called scientism.
Yep.
A lot of young Earth creationists have tried to claim that our view is completely scientific, that it's all from science. I think that's an exaggeration. But I don't think it's wrong to say that we look at the Bible and we think that's a historical document. Mm-hmm. It's telling us how much time passed in Genesis between Adam and Joseph. And then from other places, we can date it to the Exodus and ancient Egyptian chronologies and other stuff from there. And we can come to a calculated date of the Earth. It's about 6,000 years from today in the past. And we take that as having priority over scientific extrapolations of current observations into the past.
Do you think there's ever a problem if science seems to conflict with what the Bible says?
Yeah, that's a problem if you want science to pursue truth.
Okay. Yeah.
I think my view is that science should not claim that it has achieved truth, because all scientific knowledge is tentative and open to revision. But science, I think, should pursue truth, and that as a goal, right? And I like to compare it to our goal as Christians to become perfect, right? We should pursue becoming sinless. But if we claim that we're sinless, no one's going to believe you, right? Because of our just daily experience, right? I know that I'm not sinless, and I've never met anyone I've ever thought would be sinless.
Yes, and if someone said that they were, I'm not going to believe them.
Yeah, if in the same way, I think we should not believe a scientist who says, I have the truth, the absolute truth. Science should pursue truth, but we shouldn't say that we have it, we've grasped it, okay? And so what I would say is that I do think and affirm that the Bible tells us what the Bible does tell us must be absolutely true because it's from God. Okay? And that should be our highest standard for truth,
Mhm.
okay, above science. And that's the jump that many people, even many young Earth creationists, don't make. And I think it's because of the lack of understanding of philosophy of science in the last 60 years has come to a pretty wide uh, uh, consensus that at the very least, many of our scientific theories cannot be held to be absolutely true, including relativity and quantum mechanics, which are our two best theories by a wide margin in terms of accuracy of predictions and things like that. Um, and one of the reasons for that is because scientists have been unable to unify those two theories. And so we know there's something incongruous about those two theories. They don't fit together right. And
Mhm.
so we know one or the other, either one or the other has to be wrong, or there's something we're not understanding about how to connect them, or something else. And so that's why they pursued string theory for decades. That's why now that string theory, I think, isn't starting to kind of fall out of favor because of the Large Hadron Collider results. Physicists are starting to take quantum gravity more seriously, where you would say, like, there's four fundamental forces, right? There's the gravitational force that's covered by relativity, and then the other three are covered by quantum mechanics. And so the idea, the way to progress forward would be to assume, well, what if we can get gravity out of quantum mechanics? And so they're trying to get theories of quantum gravity now, where they can say, wait, they can dispense with general relativity as our main theory for gravity, and say, okay, we have now a complete theory that explains everything. And so, but right now that's not the case. We don't know that, right? And
Sure,
so
sure.
philosophers of science have understood for a long time that, just because something is currently scientific and currently the consensus doesn't to give us a whole lot of confidence that it's absolutely true. So that would be the first thing. And I think that's not an argument for young Earth creationism, but I think it's a necessary precondition for our culture, at least, to understand why one can be a rational young Earth creationist. Is that
Mhm. Now, like, do you think that there are good scientific evidences for young Earth creationism?
yeah. So I already mentioned one, right? There's
Mhm.
a theory that Russell Humphreys used to predict the planetary magnetic fields of Uranus and Neptune. Um, there's a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, this movement's been in existence since the 1960s,
Mhm.
and there's been lots of work done. One of the arguments I like to mention is the easy one to understand. Um, we know the rate of salination of the oceans today. The oceans are actually getting more salty as time goes on, and we know why in a general way. Um, because when water evaporates from the ocean, it leaves behind the salts, because that's the way distillation works, right? The water evaporates and the salts stay in the ocean.
Mhm.
And then the water evaporates and rains down partially on the continents as fresh water, and then runs off into the ocean after having dissolved certain salts from the continental crust into it. So it's actually the rivers carrying the salts into the ocean that is at least partially increasing the salt concentration of the oceans. Okay, so we know that's going to continue. There's no way to stop it. It's very slow. But if you extrapolate that rate of salination into the deep past, you quickly understand that it's fast enough that if the oceans were billions of years old, they would have long ago reached their saturation point, meaning that it's the most possible salt that can be dissolved in water. And we're not there yet, right? So
Mhm.
example would be like the Dead Sea, right? The Dead Sea has a whole bunch more salt in it than the oceans do, and that's why you can float a lot better on the Dead Sea.
Mhm. So,
And
so
so the oceans cannot be billions of years old, or the rate of salination would have had to dramatically change at some point in the past. And it's just easier to assume that it hasn't. and that the oceans are young.
Right. So, but then clearly there is also like conflicting evidence, you would say?
Well, there's always conflicting evidence. This is
Okay.
science we're talking about,
Yeah. No, no,
right?
they
So
all agree. I watched the news. They said the scientists all agree, Ben, you know?
it that might be true.
No.
That might be true. Scientists could all agree on something and still be wrong.
Well, yeah, they have been for thousands of years about many things, right? That's how you had the different, yeah, the Copernican revolution was exactly that. It's like,
Yeah,
hey, we all agree. Oh, wait, wait, wait. Maybe everyone was wrong.
it has been it you know it and at one side I understand the position that, well, if all the experts agree, maybe I should just take their word for it. And I mean, for most people, that's a good argument, and I sympathize with that. But on the other hand, we also know from history that
Hmm.
when the experts agree, even on everything, even for, in the case of the Ptolemaic model, 1500 years they agreed on this.
Hmm.
And yet eventually they found evidence and that convinced them that this is not correct and we should change our model.
Now I'll put this to you that so personally, I've always in I have a little bit of hope, but I'll say it's dwindling from what I've seen. But I would be all too happy to see like young Earth creationism be proven correctly scientifically and the
Can't prove
consensus change.
anything in science.
Right, right. But my fear goes exactly along the lines of what you said earlier is like, well, if we didn't have the Bible, we probably wouldn't be young Earth creationists. And to me, the issue of science is particularly strange because all of the major young Earth creationists that I know of have a very similar, if not actually a stronger conclusion that they would not believe that the Earth was young without the Bible. That the Bible is the driving force for pretty much all of this, and not that the Bible shouldn't be our authority, like we established earlier, and as I was affirming with good old Matt Apologeti and stuff, in the notion that the Bible is our authority. Okay, good, cool, right?
And
But
that's why I frame it
yeah.
as a historical argument,
Hmm.
because there are many historical claims that we would believe on the basis of historical documents that would be very difficult, if not impossible, to support scientifically,
Hmm.
such as the date of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. I
Yeah.
believe that because it's written down in historical accounts.
Hmm.
Can we scientifically figure out when that happened? Maybe, maybe not. But the reason I believe that it was on July, was it actually the second
Don't
now?
ask me. Don't ask me. I
I can't
call
remember.
historian friends for stuff like that.
I can't remember if it was July 2nd or actually on July 4th, 1776. The reason I believe that is because of the historical record, and that's perfectly rational to do.
Hmm.
It's perfectly rational to believe things about the past based on a historical record. And if we think that Genesis is a historical record, there's no reason why I can't believe that this happened in the way that it appears to say that it happened,
Hmm.
even if there is scientific evidence against it.
So
Because scientific evidence is so often misinterpreted.
yeah, it seems to me that Genesis 1 is not as obviously historical as Joshua 1.
Okay.
So, like to me, that's one issue that, again, I just think that the possibility that the Bible is saying something slightly different than what I originally thought, I think is very strong. And because I did grow up a young Earth creationist.
Did
So,
you have you like what young Earth creationist outlets or books did you read, articles, or did
I mean, most of the stuff from AIG, ICR, Ken Hovind, and I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, those would be probably the major ones. Of course, I've consumed many, many hours of Jason Lyle, Danny Faulkner. I watched his debates, of course, with Hugh Ross. Um, I mean, are there other? Of course, I've seen Eric Hovind. I'm trying to think of any other major. Young Earth Creationists. But to me, between Ken Ham, Jason Lyle, Danny Faulkner, Ken Hovind and stuff, I mean, those are the biggest names that I know of. Well, and of course, yeah, the entire Creation Institute for Creation Research,
Mhm.
Henry Morris and their stuff. Are there big names that I'm missing here?
I have grown in the last several years to my first resource is always creation.com now. And
Okay.
that's
Yep.
run
I've seen that
by
one, I think.
Creation Science or Creation Ministries International, and the
Mhm.
big name there is Jonathan Sarfati. Um, yeah, but you've heard of him too. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
always go there first because they have the most in-depth, long-form articles that are freely available.
Well, and then of course now, I mean, Apologeti, like I read his stuff.
Yeah, I haven't looked at his website
Okay.
yet.
No worries, no
He
worries.
messaged me on Twitter after he saw that I was going to be on your show, so I might connect with him more, but I
Yeah,
haven't had
he's
time.
he's definitely passionate about this subject and stuff. So
Yeah, so I would recommend, if you're looking into young Earth creationism as a scientific matter,
mhm,
definitely check out what creation.com has to say first.
mhm,
Answers in Genesis articles are usually very simplistic, and they often don't have a lot of references. ICR is somewhere in between, where they'll have a popular level article with some references
mhm.
that'll go to the more deeper stuff if you want to, but they don't always have that readily available. Some of it's behind a paywall. But creation.com, pretty much, they'll, any subject you want, they'll have a really long, detailed, really good article on it.
So they're a little more meaty on the science portion, right?
Well,
That's
yeah,
the ones you would really, yeah.
they're more meaty in general, even
Okay,
on
yep.
other non-scientific issues. They tend to be, I think, more meaty. But
Mhm.
um, yeah, so
Gotcha, gotcha. Well, that's cool. And
um,
I can definitely put that link in here that you recommend in the description. So.
yeah. One of the biggest evidences for young Earth creationism in more recent years that is starting to be referenced even by a lot of critics is the issue of soft tissue in dinosaur bones.
Mhm,
And that is something I know a little bit about because I've been present for a really good presentation on this from Brian Thomas at ICR. He's an ICR guy, and he went and got a PhD literally in this specific area. So uh, there's this, what we can do is we can recreate the degradation of these large macromolecules, these biomolecules like proteins, which do like everything in your body, basically, almost everything,
mhm.
other than like membranes and DNA. But um, what they do is they basically heat it up and see how fast it degrades. And then they put that, the temperature goes into an equation called the Arrhenius equation that they use to model uh, basically reaction kinetics, including degradation of molecules. And then they change the temperature to a more realistic temperature, and that gives them a date for the degradation of a molecule. And so most of these studies, Thomas always calls these bench studies, I think, show that proteins degrade or will degrade after at most 1,000,000 years. And of course, dinosaurs are supposed to have died out 65 million years plus ago. And so if we find proteins in dinosaur bones, that means they're not that old. And we found lots of collagen. Um, Another good resource on this is Mark Armitage. He runs his whole independent lab now, a microscopy lab, and he publishes in microscopy journals. And he does all this microscopy of looking at different things in dinosaur bones. He's found evidence of blood vessels, of nerve vessels now. That's a new thing, not vessels, but nerve
Tissue or
filaments.
something. Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember the word they use, but um, and that is all, I think, really good evidence that is based on science that those bones are not that old. Now, what that doesn't do is it doesn't give you an exact dating methodology, right? So we can't say, well, based on the degradation, this bone is so many years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what a lot of people always ask me and Young Earth Creationists is, what's your way of dating scientifically to verify the date from the Bible? And there is not a lot of methods to do that. There is one that I know of that's been used that is interesting. But most of these arguments are going to be there's a maximum age here. So for like proteins and dinosaur bones, there's a maximum age of about 1 million years or less
Mm-hmm.
usually.
Yeah.
The oceans argument that I mentioned, the salination argument, is going to give a maximum age for the oceans based on the current rate, which is going to be probably, I would assume it's older than 6,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
There's a ton of arguments like that. And if you go to creation.com and just look up like reasons to be YAC or something like that, they'll give you there's articles with 100 different arguments or something. I've seen one that says 100 evidences for a young Earth. Most of them are not going to give you a dating methodology.
Mm-hmm.
The best dating methodology, I think, comes from the rate study, when they used a method based on radioactive decay, actually. And so what they found was these what are called zircon crystals. They're quartz. You're smiling, you must have heard this
No, no,
before.
no, no. I'm just, yeah, go
Oh,
on,
okay.
go on. No,
They're
I'm just thinking of you know what? I don't have as often as many people to talk about like science on this level. I have a couple scientific friends and stuff, so it's kind of I don't know. In
I
a
feel
way,
bad.
it's
I feel
sort
bad
of.
because I'm talking too much.
Well, I definitely didn't invite you to like not talk, so.
There. Yeah, so the rate study, I'm trying to summarize as quickly as I can, but the zircon crystals are a type of quartz.
Mhm.
And because they have a very defined tight crystal structure, it means that atoms, like helium atoms, for example, cannot escape quickly out of the rocks.
Mhm.
And that's how we actually mine helium. If you buy helium to make balloons or something for a birthday party, you'll get it from a place. Probably there's a place in Houston that mines about 70% of the world's helium from rocks. They get them out of rocks,
Mhm.
which is weird. And the reason is because if helium's not trapped in rocks, it's going to escape our atmosphere because it's too light. So there's only trace helium in the atmosphere, and helium is going to rise to the very top of the atmosphere because it's along with hydrogen, right? Hydrogen and helium are the two lightest gases.
Mhm.
Are less dense. That's the sciencey way of saying it, right? Low density.
So the problem that I have heard, or the objection I've heard from many others, so when they talk about some of these things, so for instance, like okay, you mentioned, was it the or I forget which one, I've lost track, because but you're talking about it has a maximum age of 1 million years, one of the other things earlier, right? And this is actually similar to like Danny Faulkner also was talking about, like one of his arguments where he was talking about like, oh well, it has a maximum age of 750,000 years or 1 million years
Yeah.
or something like this. And for those that are wondering about this subject, they're kind of going like, okay, but if it has a maximum age of that long, that's not 6,000 years, right? They're just like, that is far outside of the boundaries of 6,000 years. So
Mm.
I guess their question is sort of like, okay, like how does this work? Like, because anything outside of 6,000 or 10,000, usually the maximum I've heard for most young Earth creationists is maybe 12. Some people will go up to 12. But yeah, so they're just kind of wondering like, how does that supposed to work if even the ranges that you're talking about are outside of this 12,000 year range? That makes
Well,
sense.
it means that we're using scientific extrapolations to make
Hmm.
rough calculations based on, it's usually three things: your initial amount of something. In the case of soft tissue, we can just assume that the initial amount is like a protein we would see today, like collagen. So that's not so big of an issue. But with things like radiometric dating, you kind of have to assume there's an initial amount. The rate has always been constant, and nothing has interfered through that time, and nothing has dramatically changed the rate or changed the amount in the intervening time. And those are assumptions that you have to make if you're going to make a scientific model. But they might be wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
again, this is why I try to explain this is how science works normally,
Mm-hmm.
right? When a scientist says a maximum age of 1,000,000 years, that means they're taking into account a whole bunch of assumptions that
Mm-hmm.
they themselves may not believe are true.
Sure.
They're just telling you, based on these assumptions, we can calculate this, right? So in terms of like a process I described earlier about the decay of the planetary magnetic field, right? Humphrey's model shows that there has to be a large drop at some point in the strength of the magnetic field in order to fit the 6,000-year time scale. Okay. Otherwise, you get an older age than that,
Mm-hmm.
even by his theory. But if you go back, billions and billions of years, it becomes rapidly untenable to have that strong of a magnetic field. So even secularists don't believe that. They have a different theory. But anyway, what I mean is Humphreys postulated that there was a massive decrease in the total energy of the magnetic field that occurred at the flood. And he proposed a mechanism for how this happened. And so his actual model shows the initial starting amount, the exponential decay curve, then it stops at the flood and there's a massive drop. And then it continues to exponentially decay after the flood. Okay, so you can run into situations like that. And many of those situations, we may not know what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a maximum age for collagen, let's say, there may be things about the way collagen maintains its stability that we just don't know. It's been suggested, I've heard recently that most people grow up, if you grew up watching Kent Hovind videos, which
Oh yeah.
I watch them too, but no Young Earth creationists today have not taken Kent Hovind seriously for at least 20 years.
Yeah, he's kind of out of favor today. Yes.
Well,
But
a
he
lot of,
was the gateway drug, man. Like growing
yeah,
up, like he was kind of like what got things started.
yeah, he popularized a lot of this stuff. And one of the things
Even IP, even IP, Michael Jones,
oh,
has
right.
totally said that, I mean, he started off on Ken Hovind and learned all of his stuff. And I think he even like got his like all of his materials, like literally and stuff like that. So,
Yeah, and this shows that creation science is also a scientific discipline because a lot of that stuff has changed since Hovind presented that stuff,
mhm.
right? So he promoted, among other things, a theory of the flood called the vapor canopy theory, which
Mhm.
at the time he promoted it, that was thinking within the creation scientific community. But since then, that model has been totally discarded by basically everyone. In fact, I think the last young Earth creationist who held even parts of that theory may have been John Morris at ICR, and
Mhm.
he died recently. Um, so today, the near consensus model of the flood is called catastrophic plate tectonics. It's a completely different theory of the flood, and it'll blow your mind when you understand it, right? The problem is it's complex and it's hard to understand. I have a YouTube video on that where I teach that to an adult Sunday school class. Um, but catastrophic plate tectonic, one of the big problems with the vapor canopy model was um, how do you get enough water
To stay
uh,
up in the sky, right?
in the sky to fall down and create a global flood? Like there's not enough capacity in the atmosphere to hold that much vapor. And the other thing is that if it did, it would be way too hot. Um, it's also kind of unsatisfactory because you have to essentially suggest a miracle to show why did it suddenly all condense all at once and fall down as rain. um, and then where did it go? Like, why did the flood stop? Catastrophic plate tectonics essentially solves most of those problems because it's a completely different mechanism. And it basically the idea is if this is my oceanic crust with water above it, and this is my continental crust. Essentially what happens in catastrophic plate tectonics is the oceanic crust subducts underneath the continental crust,
Mm-hmm.
and what's left at the bottom of the ocean is much hotter rock exposed because the cold crust subducted off into the mantle.
Mm-hmm.
And that hotter rock, because it's less dense, rises. And when it rises, it pushes all the ocean's water onto the continents. And so what happens actually in the flood is a leveling of the oceanic crust and the continental crust, so that water, same amount of water that we have today, could easily cover the whole world if there were no Himalayas, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to cover the Himalayas. You don't have to get to 29,000 feet to have a global flood. You just need to have the Himalayas not exist yet because they haven't been pushed up yet. And you have to have the pre-flood oceanic crust rise that pushes up and levels the whole surface of the earth so that water can cover the whole earth. And there is plenty of water to cover the whole surface of the earth to a depth of 20 feet if the surface of the earth is mostly flat. And one of the interesting features of this model is that it suggests, and Baumgartner has very complicated computer modeling of this. Was his job, was making computer models of fluid dynamics at Los Alamos National Laboratory. And so he models how what would happen if that actually did happen in real life is as the oceanic crust rose because of hotter temperatures, it would rise up and then it would oscillate with the continents. So it would go back and forth. And what you get there is the water sloshing back and forth as that happens. And that's a really good way to explain the layers in the rock column, is different oscillations of the water going back and forth, alternatively scouring off old crust and then being pushed back on and laying down sediment layers.
So,
And then the water runs away again and you get footprints.
so one of the major objections against, let's just say hypothetically, let's assume that the young Earth creationists are correct about the flood, right? That the flood can explain the vast majority of arguments, if not all. Let's just say that can explain all of the accounts for age on the face of the Earth, right? The next objection by
That's not what we would claim. But...
No, I know it's not. I know it's not. But I just want to go hypothetically for a minute in raising a completely different.
Okay. I'll let you finish. Sorry.
Yeah. No. I know they wouldn't, right? So I don't want to say that is the case, but the next thing that many others in the scientific arena object to is the idea that it's like, well, but even if that's true, the evidences cosmologically are just so strong that the universe is old or whatnot. And so that's kind of one of their objections, is like, even if you could prove most of the Earth is young, and like Hugh Ross, for instance, Hugh Ross believes that the Earth is significantly younger than the universe. So he separates the two, right? You have an old universe, a much older universe than you do Earth. So
Yeah,
even on that
everybody
model,
does. Yeah. Well,
right? Well, but the young
except for
Earth,
young Earthers, I guess.
huh?
There are some young Earthers who think that the parts of the universe are older than the Earth.
Really?
Based on time dilation. Yeah. So that's a model by actually the same one person we've already talked about is Russell Humphreys. He has a cosmological model that
Okay.
uses gravitational time dilation to explain why stars that are 13 billion years away actually are 13 billion years old.
Okay.
Yeah, because of time dilation and relativity. So that's a different model than Lyell's model, right? So
Yeah.
not all young Earth creationists would say that the whole universe is the same age. Lyell would probably say basically yes, it is the same age and that's my position.
Mhm.
So you were saying about Hugh
But
Ross
yeah, well, no, and that
differentiate.
was yeah. Merely my point was just in the distinction between the two. So now you would also argue that everything is about the same age.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, and so then therefore you just need subsequent arguments for the cosmological explanations of things.
Yeah.
So
So
outside of
one of the arguments that, and this is why I mentioned Humphreys, is because this is an argument that's used against Humphreys' model within young Earth creationism, is called supernova remnants.
okay.
So basically, you would not know this if you only listen to secular sources, but we have seen lots of supernovas.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we've looked into the sky and we've cataloged a location and we say there's a star there, and then the next night you look up and it exploded. Okay, we've seen that several times. I would, it's probably not lots, but several times.
Yeah,
The
more
other
than once,
But what
right?
we have seen lots of is supernova remnants. That is, uh, what looks to be the leftovers from a supernova that we didn't directly observe. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the rate at which supernovas occur or appear to occur is not consistent with an old cosmos based on the number of supernova remnants that we see. So given the observable universe, which is what we can see, the number of supernova remnants that we see, and the rate at which we expect supernovas to occur is more consistent with a young cosmos than an old one. And I can give you references on that. Um,
So what would be on that view or something like it? What would be like the earliest predicted universe on this alternative view?
Based on supernova
Yeah,
remnants,
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know. I don't remember the
Okay,
numbers
okay.
on that. I'd have to look at that
No
paper,
worries, no
those
worries.
papers and those references. But the other thing is that we've never observed a star forming,
Yeah.
and that is considered to be a certainty on the mainstream model, is that stars can form. Well, obviously they can form because they're here, right? Well, young Earthers, almost most of us would say that God formed the stars at the beginning of creation. Even Russell
Mm-hmm.
Humphreys would say that.
Even I would say that.
Okay, but the Big Bang cosmology starts with it's described as an explosion. They take issue with that word, but it doesn't matter. It starts with a situation where you have an expanding universe that's full of um, hydrogen, helium, and a little bit of lithium, maybe, because those are the first three elements. One proton, two protons, three protons. Okay, those are the simplest elements. Uh, and But obviously today we have a ton of heavier elements than that. So where did they come from? Well, the Big Bang cosmology, it says that um, they came when uh, the first stars formed, which are called population 3 stars, which we have also never observed. We've never seen a population 3 star, even with the James Webb telescope up and running. And in fact, that was one of the reasons why they made it, is because they were trying to look farther back into the history of the Big Bang to see these younger stars and younger galaxies. Okay. And this is where, Jason Lisle has a lot of stuff on this now, where he predicted they would not, and they in fact did not see those things. So that's another example of a successful young Earth prediction,
Mm-hmm.
is Lyell's predictions of the James Webb Space Telescope results. But they expected to see, at the very least, young galaxies. Now, the importance of this is that the first population 3 stars would form, and they have a whole theory about how this would happen, involving something called a Jeans length, which is a combination of the density and diameter of a cloud of gas, right? We've never seen that happen. It's all theoretical. Um, we've never seen a star form like that, but they say it can happen. I think Lisle says that there's reasons why he doesn't, theoretical reasons even why he thinks it can't happen. But anyway, it doesn't matter. So those gases go into a gravitational collapse and collapse into a tight ball of matter, and that becomes the first stars. And there's only hydrogen and helium and lithium in there. And it undergoes nuclear fusion reactions, which fusion literally means, they come together, right? And so these small atoms with few protons get smashed together and create heavier elements inside these population 3 stars.
Okay.
Then those explode, go supernova, blow
Mm-hmm.
up, and you've got the heavier elements now that have spread out in space.
Mm-hmm.
Those do the same thing. They have somehow they get into a cloud of gas that then condenses again into population 2 stars. And now you've got heavier elements that can undergo fusion in population 2 stars. And that fuses again and creates the heaviest elements that we see in nature. And those explode and create population 1 stars. Okay.
So everything you're describing here, right? You're talking about like fusion and explosions and this is number one, it's presumably taking place a long way away, right?
It should be taking place everywhere in the universe. I mean, they say our sun.
Relative to
Oh,
the Earth, right? Like
I
what
mean,
would
it
be
took
like the
place in the formation of our star, so it
Mhm,
would have happened with our sun.
mhm.
So not far away in that sense. But I mean, it's spread out over the universe,
Sure,
right?
sure, sure. Right, but our sun is 93 million miles away, right?
From us.
Yeah, from us, from
Yeah,
us. Yeah, yeah.
but in terms of the universe, that's not very
Yeah,
big.
yeah. In terms of the universe, I understand. That's not super far away.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah. No, no, no. I'm not.
I get you now. I was like, what?
No, 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 no. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, but like you would almost have to adopt a model like Jason Lyle in which light comes back to us incredibly quickly, right? For us to be able to view these things. Or do
Or
these events take place like super rapidly? Like they form and explode?
well, that's the Big Bang theory. Young Earth creationists don't believe that. Like, we just believe God created all the stars and planets pretty close to the way they are right now today.
Okay.
So the Big Bang theory is the one that is doing all the
Sure,
exploding
sure.
and
Okay. But we have supernovas, right? And that
yeah,
is an explosion of a type, right?
yeah,
So did God create them and then they explode like almost instantly?
yeah. In some cases, yeah. Or they could have taken, a few thousand years to explode or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, we don't. It's a really bad argument to say that God is sending us light in transit from an event that didn't happen. Some young
Right.
Earth creationists tried to argue that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's really bad. Don't go there. Even if it's true, it would totally destroy our ability to make scientific inferences if we accepted that kind of reasoning. So
Well, yeah, okay. So you're definitely against, and I think that it's good to make improvements, right? Make improvements and so for instance, you don't so like for instance when I grew up, um second law of thermodynamics was not introduced until sin came into the world. Like that was like one of the core views, right?
yeah, well, I don't know how many people believe that.
I don't know. I mean, I had read it though as well on
Yeah, for
Young Earth's
sure.
website. So, um, but yeah,
That's
like
one of
that
the
would be a view
problems
that
that,
you would not accept.
well, yeah, it makes no sense if you understand what the second law is. I mean, if the second law didn't exist, we would suffocate almost immediately because the second law dictates how oxygen disperses through volume, and remains evenly dispersed. So if you used up the oxygen in one place, if you didn't move, you just immediately suffocate. But it's even more fundamental than that. It dictates how biochemical reactions happen.
Hmm.
The term S is used in equations that describe biochemical reactions.
So you
So
know what? There are several other Christians that I know that still hold this view. Like, I mean, it was not that long ago. I literally just had a conversation with a friend on Facebook, and that was his view.
no
Um,
doubt. And
so. So
we've
I'm glad you're helping bring more clarity to that issue, like, because it's not just about, I guess I would say it this way. People hear second law of thermodynamics and all they hear in their mind is decay, right? But it's
because
more
that's
than
what
that.
happens when you find it on a Google search.
Yeah.
Right, you look up entropy or the second law and it'll
Yeah.
say disorder increases in the world, and they just assume whatever. That's a very simplistic way of describing what it means.
Right,
You
right.
should think of the second law, and this is an illustration I use in one of my videos. I did a whole video on this. Okay, you should think of the second law like the difference between having a packet of dye in a plastic bag and then ripping that plastic bag open and pouring it into a swimming pool. The second law is the entropy is the quote unquote force. We don't really know what entropy is, okay? The
Mm-hmm.
best description of it is Boltzmann's description, which is as it's just a probabilistic feature of the different positions that molecules can take. But anyway, it could be described as a force. I don't know, but we don't really know. It's a mysterious thing. But when you pour a packet of dye into a swimming pool, intuitively, because we experience this all the time, we know that dye is going to spread evenly throughout the water in the swimming pool. Entropy is what makes that happen. Okay. Now, and if you think what the term order versus disorder means in entropy is it is a more ordered system if the dye is contained in one place inside the packet of the plastic packet and the water is contained in one place and they're separate from each other. You've got 100% dye, 100% water. That's order. Disorder is when you pour the packet into the swimming pool and it disperses evenly throughout the pool. That's what disorder means.
Kind of like God separating the waters from the land and separating.
Yes. Yes.
Right? Let's like the first 3 days, right? It's all separation. It's going from disorder to order.
Yes. Exactly. And that's why I said to you in our private conversation that God doing that does not mean nothing is happening in those days, right? He is creating information is how I put it. So
Mhm.
information is, ordering things. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's just funny because yeah, I get that, like the your analogy or whatever just fit so perfectly with, yeah, the early chapter of Genesis 1.
And so people like Jonathan Sarfati, who is a trained chemist, he's a PhD chemist, he would never say that the second law was introduced at the fall, and he
Mhm.
doesn't say that. What he says is that God removed some of his sustaining power. And so his argument is that prior to the fall, perfection in creation required God to actively and continuously intervene to prevent decay.
Okay.
And then he removed that intervention, allowing things to decay naturally without that intervention.
So
That's
so so would he have like the view that Adam and Eve were immortal initially or something like that?
yes.
I'm gotcha. Gotcha. And would you be in that camp as well, or do you have a different view?
I I again I would say that they were only immortal as long as they had access to the fruit from the tree of life.
Okay. Yep. Yeah.
And I have a whole YouTube video on this, why I think this is plausible scientifically and why you could, so
See that I would agree with, right? So to me, yeah, Adam and Eve having access to the tree of life is what sustains them, right?
yes.
And even actually, I believe just watched a video of Dr.
And
Craig, and that was his conclusion as well.
yeah, Sarfati would probably say something like that, but he would mean it differently than I do, and I think Craig does. So I have essentially accepted Craig's argument on this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think young Earth creationists are a little bit um, off if they say that Adam and Eve were created in such a state that they were naturally immortal with nothing else added to it, because it says clearly in Genesis 3, God says after the fall, if I let them stay in the garden, they would eat from the fruit of the tree and live forever. And so I have to kick them out.
Mm-hmm.
So sin does not cause them to suddenly not be immortal anymore.
Mm-hmm.
God has to kick them out of the garden so they don't have access to the fruit.
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes them start to die.
Yeah. No, exactly. Exactly. Spot
Yeah.
on.
So I've accepted Craig's argument on that, but I have a different view that,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm not sure how Sarfati would respond to all of that. Um, I know he would say that the argument that I said earlier, that he would say because it says creation is very good, that means that it's not correct. Um, my response to that is very simply that I think that punishments for evil are good. Because if God is morally perfect, which I would accept, and I think most Christians would say that,
Mm-hmm.
if God is morally perfect, he can't do evil. But we know that God punishes evil. And so he causes things to happen to us, to our bodies. Even it appears that he causes diseases to occur, like in the example with David, right? Where I think he does a census of his army or something, and
Mm-hmm.
God told him not
Yep.
to, and he says, "Okay, now I'm going to punish you. Choose your punishment, right? Pick your poison." And he picks a disease, I think. But anyway, so that can't be evil if God does it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So punishments for evil cannot be considered to be evil in and of themselves. They're not evil actions. And so I think that God introducing punishments for sin in the original initial creation does not mean you can't describe it as good.
Yep. No, I think
That
I
would,
think you're correct. I think
yeah,
you're correct. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, look, Ben, it's been great chatting and stuff. Need to wrap up for today. But hey, thanks so much. And yeah, shout out. I heard you have a YouTube channel, so I'll be happy to ping your YouTube channel in the description if they want to go and learn more about you. And of course, I know that you're on Twitter because that's how I found you. And yeah, yeah. Any final
yeah,
thoughts?
if you can spell macrophage, you're smart enough to listen to my podcast called Macrophage Strategy. That's my main thing I do. I'm probably going to eventually take all my YouTube videos and put them over to a YouTube channel based on that. So, but
Yep.
I can give you my current one. Yeah.
Yep. 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 Cool deal. Well, thanks so much. And yeah, we'll see what happens next with this. Yeah, nice little young Earth creationist discussions. So thanks so much for coming on.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It was fun.